Hi, good morning, everyone. I want to ask you to consider a really important question. How do we ethically influence other people? How do we persuade them to become more likely to agree? And the reason that I think we need to ask ourselves this is that very few people know that there's a whole field of research out there on how we're influenced, how we persuade people. And I argue we should know about it. Whether we like it or not, the only common core competency of some of the most critical things that we do is influence. Whenever we communicate, whether it's leadership or negotiation or parenting or sales or team building or any of those other things, when we communicate, we are influencing and we are being influenced. Now, I have to admit, I became aware of this because I bungled away a lot of influence opportunities. You know, and probably the most significant was when I was attempting to end a relationship with a woman I'd been seeing. And she had a terrible temper. And because of that, I decided to break up with her at dinner because there could be witnesses and that might be handy. And so when I finally worked up the courage to say, we need to talk, she looked at me and she said, well, I wanted to talk to you too. And so while I might be a coward, I'm at least chivalrous. So I said, well, you go first. And she said, you know, Dan, I don't think we should see each other anymore. And at that point, I leaned forward and I said, well, why? What happened? And hold on, maybe we can work this out. And I remember driving home thinking, what's wrong with me? Well, think about it in your own lives from a serious perspective. How many times have we had the right advice or the best idea or a suggestion that somebody really should have followed, but we couldn't craft our message the best way? Well, that's why we need to know about the science. For the last 10 years, I've worked with leading researchers like Dr. Robert Cialdini to help bring the science out of the laboratory and into our day-to-day work lives. And so during our short time together, I want to tell you about this science and give you some ideas about how you can ethically use them when you go back to your world. Now, the first principle of influence I want to share with you is called reciprocity. We feel an obligation to give to those who have given to us. You know, and think about it in your own lives. You know, if you're like my lovely wife and I, you have, your first child and the first birthday rolls around and you decide to go out to Chuck E. Cheese or what we affectionately call the Temple of the Rat God. And while you're there, all of a sudden, all the kids in the neighborhoods in your church, they come and they celebrate. But what happens after that's done and you go back to your regular world? You've lost Saturdays from now on because you're now obligated to go to their birthday parties. You know, because they came and supported you, we have to go and support them. Now, what's the science say about this? Well, obviously, there are things that we typically think of as gifts, you know, taking people to lunch or giving somebody a present. But there are many other things that we can leverage that have that same impact. For example, they did a study with surveys, and they found that they had about a 34% response rate with the survey. But they decided to add, for half of the sample group, they decided to add a letter. And in that letter, they had a personalized message to the person receiving it. So if your name was Sally, you would get a message that said, Sally, I'm really looking forward to your feedback. You're very insightful. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Dan. When they did that, they had more than double the response rate. And what was even more interesting is the responses came more promptly and they had more robust data. So what does that mean for us? Well, look for ways that you can honestly benefit and invest in other people. How can you make their world better? So think of things like feedback and suggestions and compliments and other information that could really help them. One other thing that you should consider is how we approach things like trust. When we meet somebody or we bring somebody on our team, we always say the same thing. Hey, you're going to have to earn my trust. Think about the influence message there. I don't trust you. Welcome aboard. Instead, bring them on and say, you know what, we don't know each other, but I'm going to trust that you're going to make good decisions. And I look forward to partnering with you. Or when we do things for people, don't minimize the impact. We use language like, it was nothing. Somebody says, thank you. No big deal. No problem. Think about what no problem really means. Normally, you're inconvenient to deal with. Normally, you're a pain in the keister. However, today you weren't so bad. Thanks for not being a problem. So use language that is indicative of a gift. I'm happy that I could do that for you. I'm glad that you found that helpful. Hey, isn't that what friends do for one another? The second principle I want to tell you about is consistency. When we go on the record, when we tell people what we think, feel, or believe, we feel an enormous amount of pressure to remain consistent with that. And there's some great research around it. They did at a racetrack in Vancouver. They walked up to people who were waiting in line to get their betting ticket. And they asked them, what's the likelihood your horse is going to come in first? And their answers were very non-committal. But then they waited till they actually got to the window. They bought their ticket. They gave them money, took their ticket away. And the researchers asked them the same exact question. What's the likelihood that your horse is going to come in first? Instead of the non-committal answers, they were convinced. Hey, this is going to happen. My horse is coming in first. We can finally redo our kitchen. Well, what changed? They went on the record. They made a commitment. It would be psychologically inconsistent to buy a ticket that you thought was going to be a loser. And so how can we use this knowledge? Well, one, if you know that somebody has made a commitment, if they value efficiency or savings or happiness, connect your recommendation to that value, that commitment that they've made. But most importantly, ask more questions. When we're influencing, we tell people what they should do. We tell them how they should behave. We tell them how they should show up. Well, that's a bad idea from a research perspective. One of the things that we should do is ask questions. So for example, if you have a good idea for your company, don't tell them, hey, I think this is a great idea. You should do this. Ask them, when you've looked at my proposal, what are some of the advantages you see? What are some of the benefits that you think would come out of buying this product? Or if you're leading others, ask them some questions. Let's say somebody's using foul language at work. Ask them, hey, Harvey, when you yelled and cursed at the employees, what unintended message did you send? You get them to tell you. Now, the next principle I want to share with you is consensus. When we see lots of other people doing something, we tend to feel like we should go along, that we should follow. And think about it in your own lives. How many of you had a parent that said some version of, hey, if all the other kids in the neighborhood jumped off a cliff, would you? Research has bad news for you. So, what's some of the science behind it? Well, in a charitable giving study, one of the things they found is that when they went door to door, they would keep a list of the neighbors who'd actually donated money. And as the list got longer, it increased the likelihood that other people would donate. Tech companies have seen this. There's a manufacturer or an app designer who makes children's apps. And one of the things they found is when his apps show up on iTunes under the top 10 most popular, downloads increase by thousands of percent, by 1,000%. I mean, just an incredible amount. So how do we use this? Well, again, if you know that ethically that there's a lot of people who support your way of thinking, you should bring that up. You should say, here's why many others think this is a good idea. Here's why other companies like you have made the same decision. Those things will persuade people more to your way of thinking. Now, the next principle I wanted to talk to you about was authority. We look to those with superior knowledge or wisdom for guidance on how we should respond. And the science behind it is interesting. It makes sense if somebody has expertise, we should go and do what they're suggesting. But what's interesting is, from a psychological standpoint, it's not that we always validate authorities. We look to people who just look like authorities. One of the things I love about some of the scientists is they have a really demented sense of humor. And they came up with a study where they had someone jaywalk into traffic to see how many people followed them. Now, they didn't endanger anyone, but it was hilarious. And they had the same man dressed 2 different ways. The first time, they had him in jeans and a t-shirt. The second time, they put him in a suit with a tie. And they found when he jaywalked into traffic, 350% more people followed him out, just on the basis of how he was dressed. So what does this mean for us? Well, if you're trying to communicate to somebody that you do have expertise or they're not listening to your message, look for ways you can introduce that. Some businesses, some individuals have put their certifications not up in their lobby. They don't put their degrees up behind their desk. They actually will put it, in places where people can see it. And so when you walk in, you'll see their degrees out on the front. And one of the other things that's a challenge with authority is if we bring up our expertise, people can doubt us. People can doubt us. If we say, wow, I'm by far the smartest person in the room, and you should go with what I have to say, you can bet no one's listening to you. So what can we do? We can have other people introduce us. Have a friend or a colleague bring you over and say, hey, this is Harvey. Here's Harvey's background, and he's really smart, and he knows a lot about this, and here's how long he's went to school. People will find that to be much more persuasive. Now, the next principle I want to share with you is scarcity. And scarcity is an interesting one. We find that which is dwindling in availability or something that we're unlikely to get to be very desirable. And it even works with girlfriends you're planning on breaking up with. All of a sudden it changes how attractive they are. And so when you think about scarcity, there's lots of great examples. For example, the flu vaccine a few years ago. Health organizations and government agencies really struggled to get people to take the flu vaccine. Then they had a problem, and the problem was the vaccine, they didn't have enough vaccine. Suddenly there was a shortage, and the media reported it. And as soon as people heard that there was a shortage of the vaccine, people became just really committed to getting it. There were lines everywhere. They had to make sure that they turned people away who weren't children or the elderly. What changed? Well, it was just that scarcity. And so how do we use that? Well, one of the things that we've been taught is that we should always focus on features and benefits. Here are all the great things that you'll get if you follow my way of thinking. Reality is, it's not the features and benefits that's most persuasive. It's what you stand to lose by not using those features and benefits. So one of the things you can do is ask people questions, maybe blend in some of the consistency to say, what would be some of the disadvantages if we go this route? How might this negatively impact you if we don't move ahead? Those messages will tend to draw people forward. Show them what they stand to lose. Now, the last principle I want to share with you is liking. We tend to be more persuaded by those we know and like. But what we don't realize is complete strangers can evoke the same feelings of liking that we've had for people that we've known for years. I mean, think about it. When you've been away from home and you run into somebody at the airport who's from your same hometown, you say, well, where are you from? Well, I'm from Flint, Michigan. I'm from Flint, Michigan. Where'd you live? Maple Street. Oh my God, my grandma lived on Maple Street. And the next thing you know, you're talking to this person for an hour. It's that similarity. And so when we're influencing other people, our job is to go out and search for, and most importantly, comment on similarity. This is why the water cooler discussion is so important. When we have that time to really connect socially, we tend to build trust. We tend to trust people we know have things in common with us. One other thing that creates a lot of liking is praise. Praise produces liking. We like those who like us, and most importantly, tell us so. We know we're awesome. When other people recognize we're awesome, they're awesome too. And we bungle this away all the time because we focus on what was wrong, what didn't go well. Well, think about it with your own kids. If you ask them to clean up the living room, we go in there a few minutes later and there's a few spots of toys on the floor. We don't compliment them on the clean spots. We go to the parts where they missed. And so we walk up and go, hey, you missed a spot here. Molly, you missed this one right here. It's so much more influential to come out and go, oh oh my God, look at all these clean spots. Look at that clean spot. That's amazing. Oh my God, I haven't seen this corner that clean in a long time. High five. All of a sudden they're going, oh my God, there's another one. I could get a compliment for that. And so we need to look for those areas where we can honestly praise other people too. And so as we wrap up today, one of the things I want to challenge you to do is boldly reconsider some of the preconceived notions that we have about influence. Go out and seek out what the science really says. Because the difference between the almost right influence approach and the actual best influence approach is significant. Thank you for your time.